The afternoon sun hung low over Washington, D.C., casting long shadows across the quiet streets of a neighborhood where old brick houses stood shoulder to shoulder beneath tall oak trees. Birds chirped from branches, and the distant hum of city traffic felt far away, like background noise in a dream. It was one of those rare Saturdays when everything seemed to move just a little slower, as if the world itself had decided to take a breath. 14-year-old Elijah walked home with his violin case strapped to his back, the worn leather strap digging gently into his shoulder. He wasn't in a hurry. In fact, he liked these walks. The quiet time between his music lesson and dinner at home gave him space to replay the notes in his head, to feel the music still vibrating in his fingers. Today, his teacher had praised his phrasing in Vivaldi's Spring, saying he was finally starting to breathe with the bow. That phrase had stuck with him. Breathe with the bow. It sounded like magic. Elijah wasn't flashy. He didn't wear loud clothes or blast music from his phone. He was the kind of kid who noticed things. The way sunlight hit a puddle after rain, the rhythm of footsteps on pavement, the exact moment a stranger's voice softened when they talked about someone they loved. Maybe that's why music spoke to him so deeply. It wasn't just notes on a page. It was feeling made sound. His violin was old, older than he was, older than his parents even. It had belonged to his grandfather, a man he'd never met but whose photo sat on the piano at home. His mom had given it to him on his 12th birthday, wrapped in soft red cloth, her eyes glistening just slightly as she handed it over. "He would have wanted you to have it," she'd said simply. Since then, Elijah treated it like something sacred. He polished it every night, tuned it with careful patience, and never ever left it unattended. At home, things were calm but never boring. His mom worked long hours, really long hours, but she always made time for dinner, even if it was just grilled cheese and tomato soup on a Tuesday night. She didn't talk much about her job, and Elijah didn't ask. He knew it was important. He'd seen the way people straightened up a little when they met her, the quiet respect in their voices. But at home, she was just mom, someone who laughed too loud at silly jokes, who burned toast more often than she'd admit, and who always tucked him in with a kiss on the forehead, no matter how old he got. He didn't know, not really, that she was the director of the FBI, not because she hid it, but because she'd made a choice long ago. Her son would grow up as normally as possible. No bodyguards trailing him to school, no reporters snapping photos outside his classroom, no special treatment. She'd told the school staff only what was necessary for security, and even then under strict confidentiality. To his friends, teachers, and neighbors, she was just Ms. Thompson, a government worker with a demanding schedule. And that was how she wanted it. Elijah pushed open the front gate now, the hinges creaking softly. The house was modest, not grand, not flashy, but full of warmth. Books lined the shelves, family photos covered the walls, and there was always the faint smell of coffee or cinnamon in the air. He stepped inside, calling out, "I'm home!" No answer. But he heard the soft clink of dishes from the kitchen. He set his violin case carefully on the living room sofa, unzipped it just enough to peek inside. The wood gleamed under the afternoon light filtering through the window. He ran a finger along the curve of the body, smiling faintly. Upstairs, he changed out of his dress shoes and slacks, required for his Saturday conservatory class, and into sweatpants and an old t-shirt. Then he came back down, picked up the violin, and settled into his usual spot by the bay window in the living room. He tucked the instrument under his chin, raised the bow, and began to play. At first, the notes were hesitant, searching, but soon they found their rhythm. The melody of Vivaldi filled the room, bright, lively, full of birdsong and rushing streams. His fingers moved with growing confidence, his bow arms smooth and steady. Outside, a neighbor paused while walking their dog, listening for a moment before continuing on. Inside, the house seemed to lean in, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Unseen, his mother stood in the kitchen doorway, dish towel in hand, watching. She hadn't made a sound. She just stood there, eyes soft, shoulders relaxed in a way they rarely were during her workday. This quiet moment of her son lost in music was her sanctuary. In a world of threats, briefings, and high-stakes decisions, this was pure, human, real. She remembered the first time he'd picked up a toy violin at age 5, mimicking the movements he'd seen in a cartoon. She'd laughed, thinking it was just a phase, but he'd kept at it, begged for lessons, practiced even when his fingers ached. And now here he was, playing with a depth that surprised even his teachers. When the piece ended, Elijah lowered the bow, exhaling slowly. He hadn't noticed her. He was already flipping through his sheet music looking for the next piece to try. "Sounded beautiful," she said gently. He turned, startled but smiling. "Hey, Mom, didn't hear you." "You were somewhere else," she said, stepping into the room. "Somewhere good." He shrugged, but his cheeks colored slightly. "Mr. Chen said I'm ready for the spring recital. At the community center. Next month." "That's wonderful," she said, sitting beside him on the couch. "I'll be there." "You always are," he said, and there was no sarcasm in it, just quiet gratitude. She reached out, brushed a stray curl from his forehead. "Always." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Outside, a breeze rustled the leaves. A car passed by, its engine fading into the distance. "Long day?" he asked. She nodded. But better now. He knew not to ask for details. He'd learned early that some things weren't for him to carry. Instead, he offered the simplest comfort he knew. "Want to hear the new part I'm working on? It's harder, but I think I'm getting it." "Yes," she said, leaning back. "I'd love to." And so he played again, this time a more complex passage full of quick runs and sudden pauses. He stumbled once, frowned, tried again. She didn't interrupt. Didn't offer advice. Just listened, present in a way that made him feel seen, not judged. When he finished, she didn't clap, she never did. But she smiled. And that was enough. Later, as she chopped vegetables for dinner, she thought about how fragile this piece was, how easily it could be shattered by the weight of the world outside their door. She'd spent her career fighting to protect people, strangers, citizens, the vulnerable. But protecting her own son? That was different. That was personal. And sometimes it terrified her more than any threat file ever could. But for now, the house was quiet. The music still lingered in the air like a promise, and her boy was safe, whole, and full of light. Elijah, meanwhile, packed his violin away with the same care he always did. He zipped the case, set it by the piano, and headed to the kitchen to help set the table. As he passed the hallway mirror, he caught his reflection. Tired eyes, messy hair, but a small, satisfied smile. He'd played well today. Really well. He didn't know it yet, but tomorrow he'd be walking to the community center for a dress rehearsal. He'd take the same route he always did, the shortcut through Maple Street past the old hardware store across the bridge over the creek. It was a path he'd walked 100 times. Safe, familiar. He had no reason to think anything would go wrong, and that was the thing about peace. It doesn't announce its end. It just slips away, sometimes in the space between one breath and the next, but tonight none of that mattered. Tonight there was soup on the stove, music in his heart, and his mom humming softly as she stirred the pot. Tonight was enough. He sat at the table waiting for dinner, already thinking about tomorrow's practice. Maybe he'd try that tricky cadenza one more time, or maybe he'd just play for fun, no pressure, no expectations, just him and the violin, talking in a language only they understood. Outside, the sun dipped below the rooftops, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. Inside, the lights came on, warm and steady, and for now everything was exactly as it should be. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of soft light that made the city feel gentle, almost forgiving. Elijah woke early, not because he had to, but because he couldn't wait to get to the community center. Today was the dress rehearsal for the spring recital, his first real performance outside of school. He'd picked out his outfit the night before. Dark slacks, a crisp white shirt, and the navy blue blazer his mom had bought him for his last birthday. It still smelled faintly of the store. He ate breakfast quietly, oatmeal with banana slices and a splash of honey, while his mom scanned the morning news on her tablet. She looked tired, but she smiled when he asked if she'd be at the rehearsal. "Wouldn't miss it," she said, setting the tablet aside. "Even if I have to sneak in through the back," he laughed. "You don't have to sneak. Everyone's parents come." "I know," she said, her voice warm. "But I like watching you without you knowing I'm there. You play better when you think no one's looking." He rolled his eyes playfully but didn't argue. He knew she meant it as a compliment. After breakfast, he double-checked his violin case, rosin, extra strings, shoulder rest, all in place. He zipped it shut, slung it over his shoulder, and gave his mom a quick hug at the door. "Be back by 3, she said. Yeah, he teased, already stepping onto the porch. Love you. Love you more. The walk to the community center was about 20 minutes, but Elijah liked to take his time. He passed the bakery with the big windows where the owner always waved, the little park where kids played soccer on weekends, and the old library with its stone steps worn smooth by decades of feet. He usually took the main road, but today he decided on the shortcut, a quieter path that cut through a newer part of town, past renovated row houses and a half-finished construction site. It shaved off 5 minutes and the air smelled like fresh-cut grass. He didn't think twice about it. He'd walked this way before, always in daylight, always with his head up and his case visible. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just a kid going to rehearsal, but today the street felt different, quieter, still, no kids playing, no neighbors chatting on porches. Just the hum of distant traffic and the occasional clang from the construction site behind a chain-link fence. He was halfway down the block when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A patrol car rolled slowly around the corner, its windows tinted, lights off. It passed him, then stopped about 20 yards ahead. The brake lights glowed red for a moment before the car reversed, pulling up beside him. The window rolled down. "Where you headed, son?" The voice was rough, impatient. Elijah stopped, surprised but not scared. "To the community center. For a music rehearsal." The officer in the passenger seat, older with a thick jaw and a permanent frown, leaned forward. "What's in the case?" "My violin." The driver, younger but with the same hard eyes, snorted. "Violin, huh? You expect us to believe that?" Elijah blinked. "It's true. I play at the conservatory." "Conservatory?" The older one scoffed. "You live around here?" "No, sir. I'm just cutting through." "Cutting through," the younger one repeated like it was a crime. "Funny. We've had reports of kids hanging around this site trying to sneak in after hours, stealing tools. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "I don't even know what's in there," Elijah said, nodding toward the fenced lot. "I just walk this way sometimes." "Sometimes," the older officer said, stepping out of the car now. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a badge that glinted in the sun. "Let's see that case." "It's just my violin," Elijah said, holding it a little tighter. "I've got a rehearsal in 20 minutes." "Open it," the officer said, not as a request. Elijah hesitated. This felt wrong, but he didn't want trouble. Slowly, he set the case on the sidewalk, unzipped it and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in red velvet, lay the violin, its wood warm and polished, the strings taut and gleaming. The officer stared at it for a second, then laughed. "That's what you're worried about? A fiddle?" "It's not a fiddle," Elijah said quietly. "It's a violin, and it belonged to my grandfather." "Right," the younger officer said, getting out of the car now too. "And I'm the Queen of England." People had started to notice. A woman walking her dog slowed down. A man on a porch across the street stood up from his chair. But no one said anything. "Why are you acting so nervous?" the older officer asked, eyes narrowing. "If it's just a violin, why clutch it like it's got secrets?" "I'm not nervous," Elijah said, though his voice wavered slightly. "I just don't want to be late." "You're not going anywhere until we figure out what you're really doing here," the officer said. Then, without warning, he grabbed the violin by the neck. "Hey!" Elijah reached for it, but the officer yanked it away. "Don't move," the younger one snapped, stepping closer. The older officer held the violin up, turning it like it was evidence. "Looks expensive." "Too expensive for a kid like you. Where'd you really get this?" "My mom gave it to me," Elijah said, heart pounding now. "Please, just give it back." "Or what?" The officer sneered. "You gonna call your mommy?" The words hit like a slap. Elijah's face burned, but he kept his voice steady. "She's the one who taught me to respect the law." "And I am." For a second, the officer looked almost surprised. Then his expression hardened again. "Respect goes both ways, kid. And right now you're not showing much." He turned to his partner. "This whole thing stinks. Kids alone, carrying something valuable, hanging near a construction site with a history of break-ins. Doesn't add up." "It adds up fine," Elijah said, trying to stay calm. "I'm a musician. That's all." But they weren't listening anymore. The older officer walked to the curb where a low concrete barrier ran along the sidewalk. Without another word, he raised the violin high and brought it down hard on the edge. The crack was sharp, sudden, final. The neck snapped clean off. The body split along the seam. Strings snapped like gunshots in the quiet street. Elijah froze. His breath caught in his throat. He couldn't speak. Couldn't move. It was like watching someone break a piece of his own soul. The officer tossed the broken pieces back into the case. There, now you've got nothing to hide behind. The younger one smirked. Maybe next time you'll stick to sidewalks meant for kids like you. They got back in the car. The engine revved. Tires squealed as they pulled away, leaving Elijah standing there, hands shaking, tears blurring his vision. Around him, the neighborhood stayed silent. The woman with the dog hurried past, eyes down. The man on the porch sat back down, pretending to read a newspaper. No one came over. No one asked if he was okay. Elijah knelt slowly, picking up the pieces. The neck was splintered. The bridge lay in two. The bow had rolled into the gutter. He gathered everything with trembling hands, placing each fragment back in the case like he was burying something precious. He didn't go to the rehearsal. He walked home, slowly, head down, shoulders hunched, as if the weight of what had happened was pressing down on him with every step. Cars passed. Birds sang. The world kept turning, oblivious. When he reached his street, he paused at the gate, not ready to go inside. Not ready to face his mom.
How could he tell her?
How could he explain that the one thing he'd promised to protect, the last real connection to his grandfather, was gone, shattered by men who didn't even care enough to learn his name? He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. His mom was in the living room reading. She looked up, smiled, then saw his face. The smile vanished. Elijah? She was on her feet in an instant. What happened? He couldn't speak. He just held out the case. She took it, opened it, and went very still. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she closed the case gently, set it on the coffee table, and pulled him into a hug. He didn't cry, not yet, but he leaned into her, his whole body trembling. Tell me, she said softly. And so he did. Every detail. The questions. The accusations. The way they laughed. The sound of the wood breaking. She listened without interrupting. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes changed. Something deep and quiet shifted behind them, like a storm gathering far out at sea. When he finished, she held him tighter. You did nothing wrong, she said firmly. Nothing. I should have just taken the long way, he whispered. No, she said. You shouldn't have to. She pulled back, cupped his face in her hands. Look at me. What they did wasn't about you being in the wrong place. It was about them thinking they could treat you like you don't matter. And that's on them, not you. He nodded, but the shame still clung to him like smoke. She stood, walked to the kitchen, and poured him a glass of water. Drink this, then go wash your face. I'll be right back. He did as she said. When he came back downstairs, she was on the phone, speaking in a low, controlled voice. He couldn't hear the words, but he recognized the tone, the one she used when something serious was happening at work. She hung up, turned to him. I'm going to make a few calls. You don't need to worry about anything. Just rest. But the recital, we'll figure it out, she said. But first we make sure what happened today doesn't happen to anyone else. He wanted to believe her, but all he could see was the broken violin, the smug look on that officer's face, the silence of the people who watched and did nothing. Upstairs, he lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. He didn't touch his phone, didn't listen to music. The house felt too quiet now, like the music had left with the violin. Downstairs, his mom sat at the kitchen table, the broken case open in front of her. She ran a finger along the splintered neck, her jaw tight. She didn't cry, not yet, but her hands, usually so steady, shook just slightly. She picked up her secure phone again. This time she didn't speak to her assistant. She called someone higher up, someone who owed her a favor. I need you to pull 2 files, she said, voice low but sharp as glass. Patrol officers in the 3rd District. One's older, heavy-set. The other's younger, lean. They were on duty this morning near Maple and 5th. A pause. Yes. I know it's personal, but it's also professional. Because if they did this to my son, they've done it to others, and that ends now. She hung up, stood, and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was still shining. Birds still sang. The world looked normal, but everything had changed, and she knew, deep in her bones, that silence wasn't an option anymore. Not for her son. Not for anyone, But for now, she went back upstairs, knocked softly on Elijah's door, and sat on the edge of his bed. "You're not alone," she said. "Not ever," he didn't answer. But he reached for her hand, and in that small gesture she found her strength, because justice wasn't just her job. It was her promise. To him, to his grandfather, to every kid who'd ever been made to feel small for simply existing. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she'd walk it. Every step. For him. The days after the incident moved like thick syrup, slow, heavy, and impossible to stir. At first, Elijah tried to act like nothing had happened. He got up, ate breakfast, even attempted to practice on an old student violin his teacher lent him. But his fingers wouldn't cooperate. They fumbled the simplest scales. His bow arm felt stiff, disconnected. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard that crack, the sound of wood splitting, of trust shattering. He stopped going to the conservatory, made excuses about feeling under the weather. His teacher called, concerned, but Elijah just mumbled something about needing space. Truth was, he couldn't bear to walk into that room full of polished instruments and focused students when his own hands felt like strangers. At home, the silence grew. Not the peaceful kind from before, the kind that held music and warmth, but a quiet filled with unspoken anger and worry. His mom moved carefully around him, never pushing, never prying. She left his favorite snacks on the counter, left the living room light on late at night in case he wanted to talk. But he didn't, not yet. She, meanwhile, carried a different kind of weight. By day, she was still the director, attending briefings, reviewing threat assessments, making decisions that affected thousands. But by night, she sat at her desk long after the house fell dark, reading internal police reports, cross-referencing complaint logs, tracing patterns no one else seemed to notice. She'd filed a formal complaint with the local police department the morning after it happened. Not as a mother, but as a citizen. She included the time, location, descriptions of the officers, and witness accounts she'd quietly gathered. A shopkeeper who'd seen it from his window, a delivery driver who'd paused his van. She even submitted the security footage from the bodega 2 blocks away, which clearly showed the officers confronting Elijah, then destroying the violin. The response came 3 days later. A short, sterile email. After review, this matter is considered a regrettable misunderstanding. No policy violations were found. Case closed, she read it once. Then again. Then she printed it out and pinned it to her office bulletin board, right next to a photo of Elijah as a little boy, holding his first toy violin. She didn't rage, didn't yell, but those who worked closely with her noticed the change. Her questions in meetings grew sharper, her patience thinner. She started asking about civil rights violations in other districts, about patterns of misconduct that had been quietly buried. She requested old case files, ones no one had touched in years. Behind closed doors, her team understood. This wasn't just about one broken instrument. It was about a system that kept failing the same people over and over while calling it procedure. But publicly, she stayed silent. She knew the moment she spoke as the director about her own son, the story would explode. News outlets would twist it. Critics would call it a power play. And Elijah, her quiet, sensitive boy, would be thrust into a spotlight he never asked for. She wouldn't do that to him. Not unless she had to. Still, the pressure built. A local blogger, tipped off by an anonymous source, posted a vague article. Teen musician's instrument destroyed by police in D.C. neighborhood. No charges filed. It didn't name Elijah, but it included a blurry still from the bodega footage. Within hours, it went viral. Comments flooded in, some supportive, some cruel. Probably had drugs in the case, one read. Cops have a tough job, said another. But others shared their own stories. Times they'd been stopped for walking while black, questioned for looking suspicious in their own neighborhoods. Elijah saw the post. He didn't tell his mom, but he read every comment. Each one carved a little deeper into his chest. One evening, he found her in the kitchen, staring at her laptop, face unreadable. "You saw it," she said, not looking up. He nodded. "They don't even know me, but they're sure I'm lying." She closed the laptop. People believe what they want to believe, especially when it lets them ignore the truth. "Then what's the point?" he asked, voice low. "If no one listens, why even try?" She turned to him then, eyes steady. Because someone has to. And if we stop trying, they win. He didn't answer, but he stayed in the kitchen, leaning against the counter while she made tea. The silence between them wasn't empty this time. It was full of things they both felt but couldn't yet say. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, wheels began to turn. A federal civil rights investigator, someone she trusted, quietly opened a preliminary inquiry. Not an official case, just a review. Agents in plain clothes started visiting the neighborhood, talking to shop owners, checking camera angles, verifying timelines. They didn't mention Elijah by name. They just asked about an incident involving a juvenile and 2 officers on Sunday morning. One witness, the bodega owner, handed over the original footage, uncut, unedited. It showed everything. Elijah standing calmly, hands visible, explaining himself. The officers escalating without cause. The deliberate smash of the violin. The casual drive-off as if they just tossed out trash. The investigator watched it 3 times. Then called the director. "We've got enough for a full probe," he said, "but it'll take months. And once it goes public, it'll be a firestorm." "I know," she replied. "Do it anyway." But even as the investigation quietly advanced, the local police department doubled down. In a press statement, the chief called the incident an isolated event involving miscommunication and praised the officers for maintaining order in a high-theft area. He didn't apologize. Didn't mention the violin. Didn't acknowledge Elijah at all. That night, Elijah didn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the officer's words. "Maybe next time you'll stick to sidewalks meant for kids like you." Like he didn't belong. Like his presence was a threat. He got up, walked to the piano in the living room, and sat in the dark. He didn't play, just ran his fingers over the keys, remembering how his grandfather used to hum while tuning his violin, how his mom would sway slightly when he practiced sad songs. He missed the music, missed the feeling of being lost in it, of time disappearing. Now every note felt like a risk. Down the hall, his mom stood in her bedroom doorway, watching him through the cracked door. She wanted to go to him, to say something that would fix it, but some wounds couldn't be fixed with words. They had to be lived through, so she waited and watched and hoped. A week passed, then 2. Elijah started going outside again. Just short walks around the block, always with his hood up, always avoiding that street. He avoided mirrors, too, as if seeing his own face reminded him of how powerless he'd felt. His mom noticed. She didn't comment, but she started leaving small things on his desk. A new sheet of music. A book about famous black composers. A smooth river stone with the word steady painted on it in gold. One afternoon, he picked up the stone, turned it over in his palm. Then he placed it on his windowsill where the sun hit it just right. It was a small thing, but it was a start. At work, she faced growing pressure. Senators called asking if the FBI was overstepping by looking into local police matters. Reporters sent repeated requests for comment. Even some colleagues urged caution. "Don't make it personal," one advised. But she held firm. "Civil rights violations are never just personal," she said. "They're national." Still, she wrestled with herself every night. Was she using her power fairly? Or was she letting her anger guide her? She'd spent her career insisting that justice must be blind, but now, her son's face was in every file she opened. One evening, she found Elijah in the backyard, sitting on the porch steps. Watching fireflies blink in the dusk, she sat beside him. They didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "Do you think they'll ever say sorry?" She thought about it. "I don't know. But sorry doesn't fix what they broke. What matters is making sure they can't do it again." He nodded slowly. I don't want anyone else to feel like I did." She put an arm around him. "Then we keep going. Even when it's hard." He leaned into her just for a moment, then stood. "I think I'll try the violin again tomorrow." Her heart swelled, but she kept her voice calm. "Okay." Back inside, she opened her secure laptop, typed a message to the civil rights team. Proceed with full investigation. Prepare for federal charges under Title 18, Section 242. Then she shut the computer, walked to the living room, and placed Elijah's broken violin on the piano, right beside his grandfather's photo. It wasn't hidden anymore. It was evidence, and a reminder. The next morning, Elijah woke before sunrise. He took the borrowed violin from its case, rosined the bow, and stood by the window. He didn't play Vivaldi. Didn't try anything fancy. Just a simple scale, C major, slow and clear. His hands shook at first, but he kept going, note by note, breath by breath. Downstairs, his mom paused in the kitchen, listening. She didn't interrupt. Just let the music fill the quiet house like a promise returning. Outside, the world was still broken in places. But here, in this moment, something was healing, and that was enough, for now. Weeks passed, and the quiet hum of daily life returned. But it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the peaceful kind from before the incident, but the kind that comes after a storm when the air still feels charged, waiting for the next crack of thunder. Elijah had started playing again, slowly, carefully, like testing thin ice. He practiced every morning before school, not for perfection, but just to feel the connection between his hands and the music. The borrowed violin wasn't his. It didn't have the same warmth, the same voice, but it was enough to keep the melody alive inside him. His mom watched from a distance, careful not to hover. She saw the small victories, the way he held his bow with more confidence, how he no longer flinched at the sound of a car slowing down outside. But she also saw the shadows that lingered in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. The memory of that day hadn't vanished. It had just settled deeper, like a stone in his chest. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the investigation moved forward with quiet precision. Federal agents had interviewed over a dozen witnesses. They'd obtained the full security footage, verified Elijah's alibi, and dug into the officer's service records. What they found wasn't just one bad day, it was a pattern. Both officers had been named in at least 4 prior complaints over the past 3 years. Unwarranted stops, aggressive language, use of excessive force during minor encounters. Each time the complaints had been dismissed as lack of evidence or officer discretion. No discipline, no retraining, just silence. The evidence was clear, but releasing it publicly was another matter entirely. The director knew that once the story broke, with her son at the center, it wouldn't just be about 2 officers. It would ignite a national conversation about race, power, and who gets protected by the law. And while she believed that conversation was necessary, she also knew how quickly it could spiral. Headlines would scream. Politicians would take sides. And Elijah, her boy who just wanted to play music, would become a symbol whether he wanted to or not. She wrestled with it every night. Was she doing the right thing by letting the investigation proceed? Or was she putting him in the spotlight against his will? She'd promised him a normal life. But what was normal when justice required visibility? One evening, she sat at the kitchen table reviewing the final investigative report. The words were clinical, detached. Officers used unreasonable force. Deprivation of property without due process. Violation of civil rights under color of law. But beneath the legal language, she saw her son's face, the shock, the shame, the silence that followed. Elijah walked in holding a glass of water. He paused when he saw the files spread across the table. "You're still working on it," he said quietly. She closed the folder. "I have to," he sat across from her. "Are you going to tell people it was me?" She hesitated. "Only if I have to. The law doesn't require your name to be public, but if we want real change, sometimes the truth needs a face." He looked down at his hands. "I don't want to be famous for this." "I know," she said gently. "And you won't be. You'll be known for your music, but this might help other kids not go through what you did." He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "What if they say I'm lying? What if they say I deserved it?" Her voice hardened just slightly. "Then they're wrong, and we'll keep proving it." He nodded, but she could see the fear still there, coiled tight beneath his calm. A few days later, she received a call from the Attorney General. "We're ready to move forward," he said. "But we need your testimony. Not as a mother, as the director. We need you to explain why this case matters beyond one family." She agreed. The hearing was closed to the public. Just a small Senate subcommittee on civil rights. No cameras, no reporters. Just lawmakers, legal advisors, and her sitting alone at the witness table. She didn't mention Elijah by name. Not once. Instead, she spoke about systemic failures, how repeated complaints against the same officers were ignored, how communities of color were disproportionately targeted during routine stops, how the destruction of personal property during unwarranted encounters eroded public trust in law enforcement. "The law must protect everyone equally," she said, her voice steady. Not just those who look like they belong. When an officer breaks a child's instrument, not because it's dangerous but because they assume the worst, that's not policing. That's prejudice wearing a badge. She didn't raise her voice, didn't show anger. But her words carried weight, forged in years of service and sharpened by personal pain. Afterward, one senator asked quietly, "Is this personal for you, Director?" She met his gaze. It's personal for every parent who's ever had to tell their child to be careful walking home. It's personal for every kid who's been made to feel like a suspect just for existing. So yes, it's personal, but it's also professional. Because if we don't hold our own accountable, who will? Back home, she didn't tell Elijah everything she'd said. Just that she'd spoken about fairness, about making sure no one else had to go through what he did. He didn't ask for details. But that night he played longer than usual, a piece he'd been working on for weeks, full of rising notes and quiet resolve. She listened from the hallway, arms crossed, heart full. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice prepared to file federal charges. The case was strong. The evidence was solid, but they knew the backlash would come fast. Police unions were already drafting statements defending the officers' split-second decisions. Local news outlets began speculating about outside interference in city policing. Then, something unexpected happened. A former dispatcher from the local precinct, a woman who'd retired 2 years earlier, reached out to a reporter she trusted. She'd kept copies of internal logs, including radio calls and after-action notes from the day of the incident. In them, one officer was quoted saying, "Kid had a fancy case. Probably stole it. Teach him a lesson." The other replied, "Yeah, let's see how he likes his fiddle in pieces." The reporter verified the documents, then with the dispatcher's permission published the story. This time there was no blurring. No vague descriptions. The article included direct quotes, timestamps, and, most damning, the fact that the officers had never filed an official report about the encounter. They'd treated it like a joke, not a duty. Overnight, the story exploded. National news picked it up. Social media lit up with outrage. Hashtags trended, broken violin, play loud, or justice for the boy. And then, inevitably, someone connected the dots. A blogger cross-referenced the date, the location, and the fact that the FBI director lived in that neighborhood. Within hours, headlines read, "FBI director's son targeted in racist police encounter." Elijah saw it on his phone before school. His stomach dropped. He showed his mom, hands shaking. She read the article, jaw tight. "I'm sorry," she said. "I tried to keep you out of it." "It's okay," he said, though his voice wavered. Maybe it's better this way. Now people can't pretend it didn't happen." She pulled him into a hug. "You're braver than you know." At school things changed. Some kids stared. Others whispered. But a few, friends he hadn't expected, came up to him between classes. "That was messed up," one said. "If you need anything, I've got your back." Another left a note in his locker. "Your music matters. Keep playing." He didn't respond to any of it, but he held his head a little higher. At home, his mom made a decision. She called a press secretary she trusted and issued a brief statement. "My son is a talented young musician who was humiliated for no reason. While I respect the legal process, I ask only that people remember, he is a child. Not a symbol. Not a headline. Just a boy who loved his violin." She didn't give interviews, didn't pose for photos. She let the statement stand on its own. And slowly the tone of the conversation shifted. People began sharing stories of their own children, how they'd been followed in stores, questioned in libraries, told to go back where they came from. The focus wasn't just on Elijah anymore. It was on a pattern, a problem, a need for change. One afternoon, Elijah's music teacher showed up at the door with a package. "This arrived for you," she said, handing him a long, slender box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a new violin, not fancy but beautifully made. A note was tucked beneath the strings, for the boy who turns pain into song. "Keep playing. A friend." Elijah ran his fingers over the wood, tears in his eyes. He didn't know who sent it, but he knew what it meant. That night, he played for the first time in weeks, not scales, not exercises, but a full piece. Something mournful, then rising, then full of light. His mom sat on the stairs, listening, tears streaming silently down her face. Outside, the world was still loud, still angry, still divided. But in that house for a little while there was only music, and for the first time since that Sunday morning, Elijah felt like himself again, not a victim, not a symbol. Just a boy with a bow and a dream. The legal battle was far from over. The officers hadn't been arrested yet. The city hadn't apologized. But something had shifted. The truth had a voice now, and it was singing. The morning of the recital dawned clear and bright, the kind of spring day that feels like a fresh start. Birds sang from the trees, and a soft breeze carried the scent of blooming lilacs through the open window. Inside the house there was a quiet kind of energy, not the nervous flutter of before, but something steadier, like a deep breath held and then released. Elijah stood in front of his closet, smoothing the sleeves of his blazer. It was the same one he'd worn the day everything changed, but it felt different now. Lighter. He'd practiced every day for the past month, not just the notes, but the feeling behind them. He wasn't playing to prove anything anymore. He was playing because the music still lived inside him, even after everything. His mom watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. They both knew what this day meant. It wasn't just a performance. It was a return. You ready? She finally asked. He nodded. Yeah, I think so. She walked over, adjusted his collar, then handed him the new violin case, the one with the anonymous note. This one's got your name on it now, she said softly. Not because of what happened, but because of who you are. He took the case, fingers brushing the smooth wood beneath the velvet lining. Thanks, Mom. They drove to the Kennedy Center in silence, the city unfolding around them. Familiar streets, busy intersections, people going about their lives. But today Elijah didn't feel invisible. He didn't shrink into himself. He sat tall in the passenger seat, eyes forward, calm in a way that surprised even him. Backstage at the recital, other students milled about, some pacing, some tuning instruments, a few whispering last-minute encouragements. When Elijah walked in, a few heads turned. Not with pity, not with curiosity, but with quiet respect. One girl he barely knew gave him a small nod. Another handed him a spare rosin block with a shy smile. No one mentioned the news. No one brought up the officers. They just treated him like what he was, one of them. A musician. His mom didn't stay backstage. She found a seat in the front row, right in the center where he'd be able to see her if he looked up. She didn't wear anything fancy, just a simple dress, no badge, no title visible. Just a mother there for her son. The recital began with a young pianist playing a Chopin nocturne, her fingers light and sure. Then a cellist, then a flutist. Each performance carried its own story, its own heartbeat. When it was Elijah's turn, the stage manager gave him a gentle tap on the shoulder. He walked out alone, violin in hand, bow tucked under his arm. The lights were bright, the audience a sea of shadowed faces. For a second his chest tightened. But then he saw her, front row, hands folded in her lap, eyes steady on him. He took his place, tucked the violin under his chin, and raised the bow. He didn't play Vivaldi this time. He'd chosen something deeper, something older. Lift every voice and sing. It wasn't on the original program, but his teacher had agreed when he asked. It's your song, she'd said. Play it like you mean it. The first note rang out, clear, strong, full of sorrow and hope tangled together. His fingers moved with a certainty that hadn't been there before. This wasn't just music. It was memory. It was grief. It was resilience. He played through the verses slowly, letting each phrase breathe. The audience sat utterly still. Even the rustle of programs stopped. In the back, a few people wiped their eyes. In the front row, his mom didn't move. But her hands, usually so composed, gripped the edge of her seat. When the final note faded into silence, the room held its breath. Then, one person stood, then another. Then the whole audience rose, clapping, not politely, but with feeling, with recognition, with shared humanity. Elijah lowered his bow, blinking fast, overwhelmed. He looked at his mom. She was clapping too, but her eyes were shining, and she was smiling through tears. He gave a small bow, turned and walked off stage, heart pounding. Not from fear, but from something like peace. Afterward, there were handshakes, quiet congratulations, a few reporters lingering near the exits, but his mom steered him gently away, arm around his shoulders, guiding him out a side door before the crowd could close in. They walked to the car in silence, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. "You were amazing," she said finally. He shook his head. "I just played." "You gave people something they needed," she said. Even if they didn't know it, he didn't argue. He just leaned into her side for a moment the way he used to when he was little. Back home, the house felt different, lighter, as if a weight had finally been lifted. Elijah placed the violin carefully in its case, then went to the living room. His grandfather's broken instrument still sat on the piano next to the photo. He looked at it for a long time, then he picked it up, not to play but to hold. The wood was cold, the crack still sharp, but it didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a witness. A few days later, the Department of Justice announced federal charges against the two officers: deprivation of rights under color of law, destruction of property without due process, and conduct unbecoming of law enforcement officers. The evidence was overwhelming: the footage, the internal logs, the pattern of prior complaints. The police union issued a statement, but public support had shifted. Even some officers spoke out, calling for accountability. The city settled a civil lawsuit out of court, agreeing to pay damages and implement mandatory anti-bias training for all patrol officers. They also pledged to create a youth arts protection initiative, ensuring that students carrying instruments or art supplies would never again be treated as suspects. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the end of injustice, but it was a step. And then quietly, without fanfare, the broken violin was placed in a glass case at FBI headquarters. Not as a trophy, not as a warning, but as a reminder, etched on a small plaque beneath it. Justice begins when power protects the powerless. Elijah never saw the display. He didn't need to. He carried its meaning in his hands every time he played. Months later, on a warm summer evening, he sat on the porch steps, practicing a new piece, something joyful, full of quick runs and bright trills. His mom sat beside him, sipping tea, eyes closed, listening. When he finished, she opened her eyes. "You found your voice again," he smiled. "I never really lost it. Just forgot how to listen." She reached over, squeezed his hand. "You turned their silence into music." He looked out at the street, the same street that had once felt so threatening, so unwelcoming. Now kids rode bikes down the sidewalk. Neighbors chatted over fences. The world wasn't perfect, but it was his, and he belonged in it. Later that night, as he lay in bed, he thought about the journey, the fear, the anger, the slow climb back to sound. He thought about the strangers who'd sent notes, the teacher who'd believed in him, the quiet strength of his mom, who'd fought for justice without losing her humanity. He didn't know what came next. But he knew this: he would keep playing. Not for them, not to prove anything, but because the music was his, and no one could take that away. Outside, the city hummed softly in the dark. Inside, the house was quiet, full of peace. And somewhere, faint but steady, the echo of a violin lingered in the air, proof that even broken things can sing again.